Have you ever wondered why silence holds more power than 1,000 words? There are moments when a quiet turning away, a stillness without explanation, can shake the heart more than countless arguments. We often think an ending must come with a climax, with tears or accusations to mark it. But sometimes there is no sound at all, only silence, and it is that silence that truly breaks a soul. Imagine a man. His entire love life is like a play, repeating the same script over and over. He is used to holding control. He knows how to make someone cry, how to make them come back, how to keep the rhythm with his confident dominance. To him, everything is in his hands, like a game he has mastered. He believes that as long as he plays the lead role, everyone else will follow. Then one day, a woman enters his life. At first, she follows the old script too. Loving, patient, sometimes hurt, sometimes complaining. He is used to her always being there. Even after the pain, she returns. For him, that is never in question. It is as certain as the sun rising in the morning. But this time, things are different. No more tears. No more long messages in the middle of the night. No more desperate explanations or exhausting fights. Instead, there is only silence. A silence that makes the room emptier, the meals lonelier, even the music he listens to filled with strange gaps. Her silence is not childish anger, not a game to draw his attention. It is mature, almost sacred, like a decision that needs no announcement, no explanation. Yet everyone knows it has already been made. It is a silence that does not beg, does not wait, does not plead. It is like a candle suddenly going out in a dark room, leaving behind an emptiness that startles the soul. At first, he feels no worry. In his mind, a familiar voice whispers, "She is just pretending. She will come back. They always come back." He leans back, smirks with confidence. He is certain he knows the script, certain this is just another round of the push and pull game he knows so well. But this time, something is different. The script he memorized has been torn apart. No familiar signs, no predictable reactions. She disappears into silence, leaving no space for him to step in. And within that silence, for the first time, he feels an emptiness spreading inside. He does not call it longing. Not yet. He is too proud to admit he misses her. But there is a tiny crack, like a crack on the mirror you look into every day. The mirror has not shattered, but each time you see your reflection, it is there, distorting the image just a little. And that small distortion, repeated again and again, begins to unsettle him in ways he cannot explain. He continues with life as usual, still going to work, still laughing with friends, still posting confident photos online. He wants the world to see he is untouched, that her silence cannot reach him. Yet deep inside, in that thin layer between consciousness and unconsciousness, a small question lingers. Why is it so silent this time? Her silence is no longer an absence. It becomes a new kind of presence, invisible, yet hovering in his mind, seeping into the pauses of his day, appearing in his reflection, even slipping into his sleep. Her silence does not speak, yet it raises endless questions. It does not blame, yet it makes him question himself again and again. And if you have ever felt that, nothing haunts more than an absence filled with the imprint of someone you once took for granted. When they were there, you could ignore it, push it aside, treat it as obvious. But when they fall silent, suddenly, everything else becomes too loud. The laughter of friends, the music in the street, even the beat of your own heart, all of it becomes background noise, only making their absence louder. The man does not know how to name what is happening. To him, it is still a game. But the longer the game continues, the more cracks appear in the mask he wears. And her silence, instead of fading as he thought it would, grows thicker, almost tangible. Maybe you too have been like him, believing you could control others, believing pride was enough to protect you from losing something important. But the truth is, some things do not need arguments or declarations to change everything. A distant look, a step away, and above all, a silence deep enough to bring down walls that once seemed unbreakable. He does not yet realize that her silence is not a pause. It is a choice, a threshold that once crossed leaves no way back. And with each passing day, he feels the emptiness inside him spreading wider. Her silence is not an ending. It is the beginning of a transformation. But this change does not happen outside. It begins within him, in a place he cannot see. cannot control. And slowly, that silence spreads, like a crack in the walls of pride he built so long ago. Time went on, and he kept moving through his daily routine. On the surface, nothing seemed to change. The morning alarm, the meetings at the office, the quick meals with friends, the confident photos he posted on social media. Everything unfolded like a familiar script. Yet there was one small detail he never expected. The silence did not fade. It seeped into him like an underground current, soaking into the most ordinary moments. He laughed and talked, but sometimes his smile vanished without reason. He still texted with others, still received attention, but between those words, he found a hollow space, as if everything became meaningless without a certain presence. Each time his phone vibrated, a flicker of hope rose, only for him to quickly push it away, pretending it meant nothing. This silence was unlike any distance he had known before. It was not loud, not harsh, not demanding. And because of that, it grew even heavier. It was like a vast room where the echo of your own footsteps stretched too long, until it felt unbearable. He could not name it, yet the feeling grew stronger each day. Some nights, he sat alone, turning the music up loud. But strangely, the songs that once lifted him now stirred a strange emptiness. Each melody, instead of filling the void, only made the silence more visible. It was there, in the pause between lyrics, in the lingering echo of every note. And he realized, the more he tried to cover it up, the more obvious the absence became. Day after day, he began to notice details that once seemed insignificant. A corner in the cafe where they used to sit, a familiar street she once walked, a cup on the kitchen table still holding the warmth of memory. These fragments that once felt trivial now haunted him. They did not just remind him of her, they made him ask, why did I never see all of this when she was still here? Her silence was no longer just a personal choice. It became a mirror. Each time he thought of it, he did not see her, but himself reflected back. A man unaccustomed to being left behind. A man who once believed he controlled the game, now realizing the rules had changed. And the most terrifying part was, he did not know what the new rules were. He tried to escape, going out more, talking to more people, laughing louder, as if he could hide the emptiness. But the more he tried, the more exhaustion showed. Even in the crowd, even in the music and laughter, a hollow space opened within him, making him feel like a stranger to himself. At times, he thought maybe he was free from it. But then, just one fleeting image was enough to pull him back. Eyes that resembled hers, a scent that reminded him of her, a familiar song playing at a bar, and his heart stumbled again, not out of deep love, but out of the haunting of something left unfinished. Silence, once just an absence, had now become an overwhelming presence. It was no longer about her not speaking, not writing, not returning. It had turned into an inner echo, a question he had never dared to ask himself. If she no longer needs me, then who am I in this story? Perhaps you have felt this too. When the absence of someone is not only the loss of a figure, but the loss of a piece of your world. And what is even more frightening, you do not know what will remain of that world when they are no longer in it. He slowly realized that this silence was not just an ending. It was like a door closing, but behind it, another room waited, a place he had never entered. His unease was the feeling of standing before that door, not knowing whether to step forward or turn back, not knowing what would appear if it opened. He had never prepared for this. He was used to tears, used to accusations, used to returns. But silence, he had no script for it. And it was this lack of a script that unsettled him. A man once so confident in control, now lost in a play with no lines. He began to grow weary of himself. Each passing day chipped away at his old confidence. Sometimes, he sat still, letting her images wash over him. The quiet way she looked at him, the soft smile as she made coffee, the patient silence when he was careless. Small things that once failed to stop him now pierced him, like tiny, slow, quiet cuts he could not escape. And then he understood that this silence was not a game. It was a sentence unspoken, a farewell that needed no words, a choice so clear that he could no longer pretend not to see it. Yet he still hesitated to name it, because naming meant admitting, and admitting meant accepting a loss he was never ready for. The silence swelled, becoming a void that consumed his days and nights. It was like a cold wind, unseen and untouchable, yet seeping into every crack, chilling the whole house. He tried to block it out, but the more he resisted, the more it found its way in. And deep down, he began to feel fear. Not fear of her, but fear of himself. Fear that if this silence continued, it would expose everything he had always hidden. Fear that it would force him to face another version of himself, one not as strong as he believed, one not as in control as he thought. And that fear was only the beginning, because when silence reaches the very roots, it does not just take away the peace around you. It awakens a darkness within you that you have never dared to face. There were nights when he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The clock marked each passing hour, the dark room filled only with the sound of his sighs. He shifted his body dozens of times, squeezed his eyes shut, tried to ignore the heaviness in his chest, but his body refused to obey. Sleep came in fragments, broken and restless. Each time he drifted off, an image flashed before him. Her smile. The way she stood in silence that final day, and he would jolt awake, heart racing, pillow damp with sweat. Daytime brought no relief. Familiar conversations, work messages, laughter in the hallway, all turned into meaningless noise. He read emails without understanding them, sat in meetings while his mind wandered elsewhere. When someone asked, he smiled to hide it, but the smile was only a thin mask, fragile, ready to collapse the moment silence returned. He began losing his temper over the smallest things: a cup placed out of line, a careless remark, an unexpected traffic jam. Things he once brushed off now rattled him deeply. He knew he was changing, yet he could not stop it. As if an invisible hand was pulling him deeper into the spiral. In the chaos, he told himself a story. It's nothing. She was never perfect. Breaking up is for the best. He repeated it like a mantra, but the more he said it, the more uneasy he felt, as if each excuse carved a deeper mark, revealing the truth that he never truly wanted to let go. Meanwhile, she did nothing. No message, no call, no sign of watching from afar. Her silence was not an empty absence, but a mountain standing firm. He could not shake it, could not break it, could not reach it. And it was this doing nothing that unsettled him more than jealousy or anger ever could. Maybe you have been in that place too, when there were no arguments, no tears, just a quiet withdrawal that left the other person completely unbalanced. It is not a game of power. It is a choice made with self-respect. And once that choice is made, it carries more weight than any spoken word. If you have ever chosen silence as a way of loving yourself, you understand how it can shift the entire world around you. It not only forces the other person to reflect, but it helps you see your own worth. If you have lived through that moment, share your story in the comments. Perhaps your words will be the courage another woman needs right now. And if these words touch something in your heart, show it with a like, a subscription, not for noise, but so we can hold on to the quiet strength of these moments together. The man still did not fully understand, but his body had already spoken. Restless nights, lost appetite, the weariness showing in every move. These were not signs of simply missing someone. They were the signs of a hidden battle between his pride and the truth he did not want to face. He once believed he was invincible in love. Yet now, one silence was enough to shake him to the core. Each time he tried to escape, he fell into the same loop. More outings, more laughter, more people. But when he returned to his empty room, it all vanished, leaving only the echo of his own unease. The noise outside only made the silence inside louder. Slowly, he realized there was no escape. Deep down, a new fear began to grow. Not the fear of losing her, but the fear of seeing himself reflected in her silence. Because when she no longer reacted, no longer spoke, no longer argued, he had no place to hide. He was forced to face his own shadow, the weakness, the dependency, the parts of himself he had always buried beneath a facade of strength. And in that moment, a question rose within him. If this silence never ends, what else will I lose? He had no answer, but he could feel a truth rising, the truth that the game was no longer in his hands. And that truth made his heart pound, as if the whole world had just been turned upside down. Because eventually he would realize, silence is not just withdrawal, it is a symbol powerful enough to shake the deepest corners of the unconscious he had always denied. The long nights began to feel different. In his broken sleep, he started dreaming of her. But they were not sweet or romantic dreams. In those dreams, she was always far away. He could see her silhouette, hear her voice, but when he reached out, the distance never closed. He tried to call her name, yet the sound dissolved into nothing, and each time he woke, the emptiness clung to him, heavier than any dream he had ever known. By day, memories came alive in strange detail. The way she smiled gently while pouring another cup of coffee, the dimming of her eyes when he spoke carelessly, her patient hands folding the shirt he had carelessly thrown on a chair. All of it, the fragments he once dismissed as unimportant, now rushed back with force, overwhelming him. He asked himself, why did I not see it then? Why were these small things never enough to hold me, yet now they haunt me? Perhaps because only when a presence disappears do we finally understand how quietly essential it always was. Her silence was no longer just emptiness. It had become a symbol, a wordless declaration that she was no longer the same woman. She had stepped into another version of herself, wiser, calmer, stronger. And he was still trapped in the old script, with old habits, clinging to a confidence that now began to crack. In his unease, he tried to test the waters. A like on an old photo, a quick glance at her story before exiting, a short empty message, "Are you doing well?" All of it just to confirm one thing. Did he still exist in her world? But what came back was silence. No response, no sign. And it was this lack of reaction that unsettled him more than rejection. At least rejection is a response. This was only silence, deep and vast, leaving him with nothing to hold on to. He began to feel the power shift. The man who once thought he set the rules was now the one waiting outside, hoping for the smallest signal. But no signal came, and in that prolonged quiet, the weight inside him grew. What frightened him most was not her disappearance, but the disappearance of the familiar script. He had always lived in cycles, mistakes, arguments, reconciliations. Now the cycle was broken. No beginning, no end. Only silence stretching endlessly, like a journey with no map, no destination. He realized he had lost more than a person. He had lost his certainty, his pride, the illusion of control. And when those things crumbled, her silence became an alarm, forcing him to face the truth he had always avoided. He was not as strong as he believed. In her silence, she had become a mirror. Each time he thought of her, he did not just see her. He saw himself, with all the weakness and dependency he had tried to hide. And for the first time, he understood that silence is not retreat. It is affirmation, a symbol of change, of strength, of self-respect. Perhaps you too have lived through such a moment, when someone no longer argues, no longer demands, no longer asks for anything, but simply walks away in silence. At first, you feel relief, but as the silence lingers, it turns into an obsession. Because silence gives you nothing to cling to. Silence forces you to turn inward, and that is the hardest thing of all. He continued to try, with small gestures, as if casting signals into the void. But the void stayed indifferent. He began to realize he was no longer the center. That silence had carried her far away and left him facing only himself. Day by day, the truth grew clearer. She had changed, and he had not. And it was this gap that left him confused, restless, afraid. Afraid that while he remained trapped in the old, she had stepped fully into another world, a world where he no longer belonged. In that fear, a question began to form. If this silence lasts forever, what will I be in her memory? And when that question echoed inside him, he finally understood. The real unease was not about losing her. It was about losing the illusion that had held him up for so long. He began to realize there are things that cannot be swayed by reasoning, nor held by force. In the past, he was used to the idea that with one word, one promise, or even just a brief silence from her, he could predict what came next. But now, everything was shattered. There was no script left for him to hold on to. Her silence had become an invisible wall. He knocked, but no one answered. He sent a message, but there was no reply. He left small traces, a like on her photo, a quick glance at her story, but everything fell into emptiness. The silence did not waver. It stood there, steady, as if to say, everything has changed. What unsettled him most was not the loss of contact. What threw him into crisis was the fact that he no longer controlled the story. He once believed he held the script, that he set the rhythm, that he kept the lead role. But now the script had been rewritten without his consent. And in this new script, he was no longer the center. The more he tried to comfort himself, the more powerless he felt. He told himself, "She will weaken. She will come back." But as the days passed and the silence held firm, those words became a lie he could no longer believe. He tried to justify himself. She had her faults too. This love was never solid anyway. But those excuses were only dust on a mirror. With just one breath, the truth was clear again. He had never been ready to lose her. While he struggled, she had stepped into another journey. She was no longer the woman who once waited for explanations, who quietly followed behind to gather the pieces he left. No, she had chosen to return to herself, and that was what frightened him most. When a woman chooses herself, she no longer stands where she once did. He could search through memories, but he could not touch the version of her that now existed, a version who knew her worth, who understood that silence too is a powerful choice. He was not used to this. He was used to tears, used to accusations, used to long conversations in the night. He knew how to handle anger. He knew how to end a fight. But he did not know what to do with absolute silence. Silence gave him no ground to argue, no excuse to prove himself. Silence only reflected the truth. She no longer belonged where he stood. He sat before his phone, typing a message again and again, only to erase it. Not knowing how to start, not knowing what to say. In the end, he simply sighed, put the phone down, and let the emptiness spread. There were afternoons when he drove aimlessly through old streets. Without thinking, the wheels carried him past the cafes they once visited, the corners where they once stopped. Everything was familiar, yet strangely hollow. He felt like a stranger wandering a city that once belonged to him, now foreign and distant. Deep inside, he knew what he was losing was not only a woman, he was losing a part of himself. The part that believed he was the center, that love would always orbit around him. Her silence had revealed the truth. He was not as strong as he thought, not as steady as he believed. And that realization hurt more than any farewell. He tried to hold on unconsciously, but each attempt was met with silence, vast and unshaken. And slowly he understood. Some walls cannot be broken by force. They can only be accepted. On the other side, she no longer needed to prove anything. She was not silent to make him change, nor to make him hurt. She was silent because she chose herself. It was the choice of freedom, of dignity, of love for her own soul. And once that choice was made, it carried her out of the old cycle, out of endless conversations that never led anywhere. He could not fully understand, but in his heart, he felt the weight of an irreversible loss. She was no longer the woman he once knew. She had returned to herself. And when someone truly finds themselves, they can no longer stay where they once were lost. Maybe you too have lived through such a moment, when you chose yourself. And from that moment on, you could never go back to the person you used to be. It is both painful and freeing, because you realize silence is no longer a void, but a doorway to a new path. For him, the greatest fear was this. That doorway had closed to him. He could stand outside, knock, even call out loudly. But on the other side, she had gone too far to hear. And in that moment, he understood. This silence was not just a phase. It was a threshold. Once crossed, there is no return. And when a woman steps across that threshold, she does not only leave him, she leaves behind the old script itself, stepping into a world where he no longer plays the leading role. One evening, with alcohol still lingering in his blood, and the weight of days of longing pressing against him, he opened his phone and quickly typed a short message. "Are you doing well?" Short, lonely, carrying nothing but a test. He did not expect a long reply, just a sign, a ripple, something small to prove that he still existed somewhere in her thoughts. But the message slipped into emptiness. No reply, no trace. He was not even sure if she had read it. And it was this uncertainty that made him restless. In the past, he was always certain of where he stood, always certain of her reactions. Now everything fell into a fog with no answer. A few days later, he tried again. An old song shared online, a quiet reminder of what once was, a photo at a place they had been together, a vague status, just to see if she would notice. He waited, holding his breath at every notification. But silence remained, and slowly, that silence began to make him feel small. Deep down, He knew she was no longer in the same place to listen, to look, to react as before. She had gone far, not in distance, but in spirit. While he still stumbled with his old ways of holding on, she had found a new ground inside herself. She no longer needed to wait, no longer needed to test if he still cared. Her silence was not born of anger, but of peace, and that peace made all his efforts meaningless. He tried a different approach. One late night, he wrote a longer message, softer, almost trembling. I have been thinking a lot. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I never saw you as you deserve to be seen. If I had a chance, I would want to start again. His words repeated, fragile, like a man finally laying down his weapons. But this time, even if an answer came, he knew it would no longer be the same. Because once someone has returned to themselves, coming back is no longer about saving. It is only a choice. And that choice, she would not rush. The message sat there. No blue check mark, no sound of delivery. He stared at the screen, heartbeat heavy, time dragging endlessly. The night grew deeper, but no reply came. And he understood. This silence was not absence. It was a complete answer. While he was waiting, she was sitting alone in her quiet room, but with a different state of mind. She had learned how to listen to herself. She no longer feared emptiness, no longer felt lonely in stillness. She had learned to stay with herself, and that made silence a companion instead of a punishment. He could not understand that feeling, because he was still trapped in the need for a reply, in the habit of waiting for affirmation. But for her, silence was no longer waiting. It was a choice. It was the affirmation that from now on, her love would not come from lack, but from wholeness. And that made every signal he sent weak. He still hoped, still tried, still wandered, like a man who lost his keys and could not remember where. But the lock had been changed. It no longer opened the old way. Perhaps you too have seen this moment. When someone returns with apologies, with promises to change, but when you look into their eyes, you know it is not enough, because true change is not in words, but in the patience of time. And no one can hide that truth. He could keep trying, keep promising, but she was different now. She no longer needed to hold a hand just to avoid feeling empty. She had learned to hold herself, and that made every other hand unnecessary. He sat alone, thinking of it all. The memories, the haunting dreams, the unread messages. And finally, he realized. Her silence was not a punishment. It was a revolution, a quiet but fierce change. Not against him, but for her to return to herself. He trembled at that truth. Because if this silence was truly a decision, then he had not only lost a woman, he had lost the chance to keep his place in the old story. The story had turned a page, whether he wanted it or not, and only then did he understand. Her silence was not a void. It was a border between the woman he once knew and the woman now emerging, radiant in her stillness. He had tried everything, from small signals to long messages, even once writing an entire letter with trembling hands, struggling to find the words to express regret. But all of it fell into the same place. Silence. A silence solid as stone, unmoved by words or promises. And then, something he had never prepared for came upon him. He began to understand that some losses have no way back. Not because the other person is cruel, but because they have stepped through a door he can no longer enter. She was no longer standing where she used to, listening, reacting, waiting. She had chosen a new path, where the center was no longer him, but herself. He realized her silence was not punishment. It was not a game of power meant to hurt him. It was simply a decision, a way of saying, I have returned to myself. And when a woman makes that choice, she no longer belongs to anyone but herself. This left him shaken, because all his life he had counted on certainty, on always having arms waiting for him to return. He believed love was something he could come and go from at will. But this time, the door had closed, not with noise, not with anger, but with absolute peace. And it was this peace that frightened him most. He began to remember. Every time she was silent after being hurt, every smile she used to cover sadness, every moment she stayed, no matter how careless he was. Those memories, once dismissed, now returned as heavy pieces of truth. And suddenly, he saw what he had lost. Not only a woman, but a presence that once gave him peace he never knew how to cherish. But now, she was no longer the woman she used to be. She was no longer searching for love as validation. She had learned to love herself, to stay in silence without fear. And once she found that strength, he could no longer reach her. She sat in her familiar room, light falling gently across her face. She needed no proof, no argument. She simply sat, still, feeling peace radiate from within. For the first time in so long, she felt whole without needing anyone else beside her. For him, this was impossible to accept. He still sent small signals, hoping to stir her heart. A like on an old photo, a sudden goodnight message. But she no longer reacted. Not out of hate, but because she had stepped into another state of being. A place where love was no longer about losing oneself, but about sharing from completeness. Perhaps you too have lived this moment. When you realize that even if the other person came back with beautiful promises, you no longer wanted to return to the old story. Not out of bitterness, but because you had changed. And it is that change that shows you some doors close to protect the peace you have finally found. He did not know what to do with that feeling. Deep down, he knew he had lost. Not lost in an argument, but lost to her growth. A growth he could not stop and could not pull back. And then one morning, he woke to a truth that no longer needed questioning, no longer wondering if she would return, no longer clinging to fragile hope. Only the realization that she had gone far, and he was no longer chosen to go with her. She, in her silence, had closed the story. Not with farewell words, not with tears, but with absolute peace. And that peace, in the end, was the strongest answer of all. Carl Jung once said, "Symbols are the most powerful expressions of the unconscious." Her silence had become such a symbol, no longer emptiness, but an echo, forcing him to face the deepest parts of himself. And for her, silence was no longer endurance, but liberation. She no longer needed him to confirm her worth. She had found that worth within herself. The story did not end in reunion, nor in loud farewells. It ended in return, a return to herself, a return to peace. And that is the power of silence. A quiet revolution, yet powerful enough to change everything. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is not speak, not explain, but simply remain silent. A silence that is proud, gentle, and whole. Enough to make the world turn around you in ways it never has before. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.